Welcome to Thursday's edition of the Daily Report. It's 2 p.m. here in Seoul, and I'm Yoon. We begin with the Fukushima wastewater release. Japan began releasing the wastewater an hour ago from the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. For more, we're joined by our Kim Jung-sil, who's waiting on the line. Jung-sil, give us the latest.
Yoon, the water is being released into the ocean as we speak. NHK is reporting that the actual release began around 1 p.m. NHK also reported that the water is being released through an underground tunnel, which stretches 1 kilometer from the coast. This morning, TEPCO, that is Tokyo Electric Power Company officials, announced that today only 200 to 210 tons will be released, given it began the discharge at 1 p.m. Starting tomorrow, though, with the 24-hour window, 460 tons of wastewater will be released into the ocean each day. TEPCO officials also told reporters that the concentration level of tritium were measured on Tuesday when Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced that the release could take place as early as Thursday. TEPCO officials mixed a liter of wastewater with 1,200 tons of seawater on Tuesday and measured its tritium concentration level to see if it's below government standard of 1,500 becquerels per liter. Japanese officials said it was far below the standard and this morning gave the go-ahead for today's release.
And Jung-sil, I'm well aware that the international community has been raising their concerns over this decision. It's going to be taking 30 years. So could you walk us through the reaction both in and outside of Japan?
Yes, absolutely. I want to start by mentioning Prime Minister Han Duck-soo's briefing that took place just minutes ago. He said that Seoul will be given the latest information from Japan and that the government will closely monitor the situation. Now, Prime Minister Han is also very aware of the public fear against Japanese seafood. And he said the seafood ban will remain for 15 Japanese prefectures, including Fukushima, that it won't be lifted. Although he also added that extreme concern isn't necessary if all are taken care of by scientific and international standards. But not everyone agree with what the government says. The main opposition, the Democratic Party of Korea, and some civic groups remain strongly against the release. They claim that the release will threaten future generations and is an environmental crime. The Chinese government will likely announce its reaction this afternoon at the regular briefing. China is one of the countries that is most strongly opposed to Japan's decision, saying Tokyo's decision is, quote, selfish and irresponsible for putting China and neighboring countries in danger of nuclear contamination. Hong Kong announced on Tuesday it will ban Japanese seafood from today. The European Union, on the other hand, lifted last month all import restrictions on food, including fish imported from Japan. Now, moving on to the situation in Japan, while 53% of the respondents there think the release is appropriate, according to an NHK survey this month. In another survey done by Japan's Asahi Shimbun, 75% of the respondents said the government countermeasures against possible reputational damage aren't enough. Japan's fisheries industry, therefore, was against the release from the beginning, saying it would put their livelihoods in danger. But TEPCO officials and the Japanese government has continuously saying they will take full responsibility for the safety regarding the release and reassure them of the scientific safety of the procedure. That's all I have for this hour. Back to you, Yoon.
All right, thank you so much, Jung-sil. Until then, we'll have to see what the future developments are. Moving on, earlier this morning, North Korea made its second attempt at launching its first spy satellite, but it ended up failing yet again. South Korea immediately convened a National Security Council meeting. There, officials condemned the North for violating UN Security Council resolutions. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Arirang reports.
Pyongyang's second attempt to put a satellite in orbit took place at around 3:50 a.m. on Thursday. The North Korea Central News Agency said that the flight's first and second stages of the rocket were normal, but during the third stage it failed due to an error in the emergency blasting system. The North Korean National Aerospace Development Administration said it will explain the reason for the error soon, adding that a third attempt will likely come in October. Multiple Japanese news outlets said that Japan's Coast Guard had earlier presumed that the launch could have been a ballistic missile, adding that it separated into pieces which landed in the West Sea, East China Sea, and the Pacific Ocean near the Philippines. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said that it detected the rocket flying above international waters off the Korean peninsula's west coast after its launch from the northwestern Dongchangni area where the main space launch center is located.
South Korea will continue high-intensity Seoul-Washington joint military drills while closely monitoring Pyongyang's further actions.
Seoul's military officials also said they are currently in the process of retrieving the satellite body and the wreckage that has fallen in the West Sea. Meanwhile, officials from the South's Defense Ministry and other related officials attended the National Security Council meeting at around 6 a.m. Members of the council strongly condemned the launch and said that it clearly violates the UN Security Council resolutions. President Yoon also ordered officials to brace for any additional provocations by North Korea and share the analysis result with Washington and Tokyo. He also asked to promptly carry out what had been pledged in the Camp David Trilateral Summit earlier, such as sharing missile alert information in real time and strengthening defense ties for missile provocations. U.S. State Department also agreed that the failed launch was a violation of the UN Security Council resolutions and urged Pyongyang to stop illicit and threatening activities. Washington also added that it still pursues dialogue without preconditions with North Korea. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Since Monday, South Korea and the U.S. have been conducting joint military drills as part of the annual Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise. The training is focused on engaging and responding tactically in real-life war scenarios, specifically in urban settings. Defense correspondent Choi Min-jung was at the site.
Let's go, go, go! Come on, Lee!
A fierce battle unfolds in a small mocked-up town in Paju, Gyeonggi-do Province. Soldiers of the South Korean and U.S. armies infiltrate a building and take positions to target the enemy. This is a joint urban warfare drill taking place at a training center that looks very much like the cities people live in here in South Korea. It's part of Seoul and Washington's Freedom Shield exercise, which kicked off on Monday. Soldiers are taking part in offensive and defensive operations despite the heavy rain for over 5 days.
This joint urban operation training was a valuable opportunity to verify Seoul and Washington's interoperability as one unit.
A total of 500 South Korean and U.S. soldiers are participating in the exercise day and night, using lasers and blank cartridges to stimulate actual battles. Various military assets were also deployed, including the U.S. Stryker armored vehicle. Despite the language barrier and bad weather, soldiers from both countries were able to cooperate and complete the mission together.
I can tell you everyone in my platoon had a great time working with the ROK Army. They've been incredibly professional. They really understand how we work together, and we had a great week out here this week.
South Korea's army has vowed to develop urban exercises suitable for future use in real-world scenarios by further improving combined arms training. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Regarding last week's historic summit between the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, the U.S. ambassador in Seoul says the security arrangement made at Camp David is not legally binding like NATO, but a political agreement. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has the details.
The U.S. ambassador to South Korea, Philip Goldberg, says the commitment to consult, which outlines Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo's commitment to coordinate their responses to regional threats, is not a binding agreement. While meeting reporters on Wednesday afternoon at his residence in Seoul, he stressed that Camp David is not a new NATO. He explained that it's not a duty nor a military alliance between South Korea and Japan, but rather a cooperative step where the three countries can interact when there are common threats.
So you can think of it more as a political agreement than a legally binding agreement.
When asked if the commitments made at Camp David will last even after elections, he said the interactions that will take place in the next several months will make it an enduring relationship, regardless of the political factors in each country.
It has a very strong commitment from the three leaders. In the case of the United States, there's a tremendous bipartisan agreement, of which isn't all that common in our political life, in support of this.
As for the possibility of the second trilateral summit taking place in Seoul, he said the invitation by President Yoon was well received, but refrained from confirming further details. He also highlighted President Yoon's role in bringing the three countries together by taking forward-looking policies and leadership to improve relations between Seoul and Tokyo. He added that while this relationship is very important to Washington, it depends on the people and the leaders of the two countries, and that it's not something the U.S. can and would resolve. Since taking office in May last year, President Yoon has been working to restore ties with Japan by resolving historical disputes, such as the issue of compensating the Korean victims of wartime forced labor during Japan's colonial rule, before and during World War II. Meanwhile, as for the issue of Japan's plan to release wastewater from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear power plant, the ambassador said the U.S. and South Korea's positions align, adding that Japan has followed the internationally accepted process. 배은지, 아리랑 뉴스.
For the fifth straight time, the Bank of Korea has decided not to budge with its interest rate, which means we'll still see the key interest rate at 3.5%. This comes amid growing economic uncertainties over weakening investment and consumption patterns. Our finance correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
As widely expected, the Bank of Korea announced another freeze, keeping its key interest rate at 3.5%. The decision was made on Thursday following a Monetary Policy Committee meeting.
Inflation is slowing down, but considerable amount of time will be required for it to stabilize at the target level. Considering rising economic uncertainties and the need to closely monitor household debt, we have decided to keep our tightened monetary policy. The Board of Governors voted unanimously to maintain the current tightening stance.
This is the fifth consecutive time that the BOK has decided to keep the rate unchanged. The base rate has been held at 3.5% since February, following 10 consecutive rate hikes to tame inflation beginning in August 2021. The BOK's latest decision came amid concerns over rising economic woes in China with a deepening real estate crisis in the country. Due to these factors, an economic recovery for South Korea in the latter half of 2023, as initially anticipated by the government, has become more uncertain. The latest decision reflects the central bank's intention to monitor the situation rather than imposing a hike, which could further weaken people's spending and investment. In fact, while the growth rate for the second quarter is higher than that of the first quarter, by sector, private consumption, exports, imports, investments, and even government spending have slowed down. Meanwhile, despite the economic slowdown in China, as well as a decline in South Korea's exports, the BOK on Thursday maintained its economic growth outlook for this year at 1.4%. Consumer price growth is expected to be at 3.5%. South Korea's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, has been cooling down. In July, it rose by 2.3% compared to the same month last year. This is the smallest increase in over 2 years and marks the 6th month in a row that the rise on year has fallen. But there are still lingering factors that could raise prices, such as geopolitical risks and other accumulated pressures, such as higher public utility fees. Due to the BOK's latest decision, the rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. now stands at 2 percentage points. The widening rate gap, soaring household debt, and rising exchange rate between the Korean won and the U.S. dollar mean it may be some time yet before the central bank considers rate cuts. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Wholesale prices in South Korea edged up by 0.3% on month in July, increasing for the first time in 4 months. According to the Bank of Korea on Thursday, the producer price index for agricultural and fisheries products increased by more than 4% on month. The prices for agricultural goods jumped by more than 10% from June due to torrential downpours and heat waves. Petroleum-based products were also up by 3.7% from the month before due to higher oil prices. To foster innovation and economic growth, South Korea will keep looking to scrap so-called killer regulations. That's according to President Yoon on Thursday, chairing a regulatory innovation strategy meeting attended by various economy-related ministers and private sector representatives. Noting that the government so far has worked on improving over 1,400 regulations, Yoon called for a bolder and swifter process, saying it affects people's livelihoods. The meeting on Thursday focused on loosening occupancy standards, which hindered high-tech and emerging sector firms from moving into industrial complexes, along with outdated environmental standards on chemicals. The government also plans to dramatically expand quotas on visas and employment for skilled foreign workers and students to encourage the inflow of international talent. The man who led a rebellion against Russian President Vladimir Putin is believed to be dead. He's Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Russian private military group Wagner. Reports say Prigozhin was aboard a plane that crashed on Wednesday, and the exact cause of the crash is still unknown. Lee Si-hoo with the details.
The Russian paramilitary group Wagner's chief Yevgeny Prigozhin was on the list of passengers aboard a plane that crashed on Wednesday. Russia's Emergency Situations Ministry said that all 10 people aboard the plane were killed. The private plane was traveling from Moscow to St. Petersburg. Prigozhin, 62, founded and led the Wagner group, which rose to prominence in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The group, which includes fighters recruited from prison, led the attack on the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut and claimed to have seized the city in late May this year. But there were clashes between the group and Russia's military. In late June, Prigozhin began a rebellion and claimed that Wagner had taken control of all military facilities in the key Russian city of Rostov-on-Don. The group continued to march on Moscow but stopped upon Prigozhin's orders. Prigozhin claimed he called off his march to save, quote, Russian blood, and his group was allowed to retreat to Belarus. But Vladimir Putin hours earlier had said that those responsible would suffer punishment, accusing Prigozhin of treason.
What we are facing now is treason. Unreasonable ambitions and personal interests lead to treachery, state treason, and the betrayal of our own people.
There are rising suspicions about the cause of the fatal plane crash.
Yes, would Putin have done this? Well, he has certainly the Russian security forces have a history of poisoning people at home and abroad, and political opponents or people that Mr. Putin has previously called traitors.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Wednesday told reporters that he was not surprised by the news.
There's not much that happens when Russia and Putin not behind, but I don't know enough to know the answer.
Russia's Federal Agency for Air Transport has launched, quote, a specially created commission to investigate the crash. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
In the meantime, India achieved a major lunar feat on Wednesday. It has become the first country ever to reach the moon's south pole, all thanks to its Chandrayaan-3, meaning moon vehicle in Sanskrit. It's now set about its task of searching for water on the lunar surface. Lee Seung-jae reports.
India is now just the fourth country after the United States, China, and the former Soviet Union to land a spacecraft on the moon after its Chandrayaan-3 spacecraft successfully touched down on the lunar surface on Wednesday. What made this latest lunar landing all the more special for India is that the unmanned spacecraft became the first to reach the moon's South Pole region. This is significant in that the South Pole region of the moon is considered an area of key scientific and strategic interest for spacefaring nations, with scientists believing that the area could have water ice deposits. And that could eventually be used to make rocket fuel or even drinking water for future crewed missions. Having watched the landing virtually, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's currently in South Africa for the BRICS summit, praised the lunar landing, saying that the success belongs to all of humanity, as it will help moon missions by other countries in the future. People in India took to the streets to celebrate, with people dancing, waving Indian flags, setting off firecrackers, and playing drums following the breakthrough mission. And following Chandrayaan-3's successful 384,400-kilometer trip, it's expected to remain functional for 2 weeks, running a series of experiments. This includes a spectrometer analysis of the mineral composition of the moon's surface. 이승재, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In the U.S. state of Georgia, former New York City mayor and former personal lawyer to Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, has surrendered to a jail in Atlanta. Giuliani on Wednesday local time paid a $150,000 bail bond and left the jail after getting his mugshot taken. He faces 13 charges related to alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 U.S. presidential election. He has called the case an attack on the American people. Giuliani is one of 19 defendants, including former President Donald Trump, and alongside Trump faces the most charges, including racketeering and making false claims about the 2020 election. 7 other co-defendants have so far turned themselves in. Trump has said he will surrender to jail on Thursday local time. Prosecutors have set a surrender deadline for Friday noon. In Mexico, at least 16 people were killed and 36 injured on Tuesday local time after a bus crashed into a freight truck. The bus was carrying 52 passengers, including locals, and 10 passengers from Venezuela. 15 Mexicans and 1 Venezuelan died in the crash. The incident took place on a highway near the border between the central states of Oaxaca and Puebla. The cause of the crash is still unknown, but local prosecutors have launched an investigation. According to Mexico's National Institute of Migration, the Venezuelans were on their way to an appointment with the United States Customs and Border Protection in a bid to legally enter the U.S. And finally, thousands of people have descended on the German city of Cologne for one of the world's largest video game trade fairs. Starting on Wednesday, the 5-day Gamescom convention will see announcements being made about all the latest in the world of gaming content. This from some of the gaming world's biggest names, including Assassin's Creed, Alan Wake, and Grand Theft Auto. According to organizers, this year the focus is on artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and gamification. The convention expects to see 1,200 exhibitors from 62 countries. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Unlike yesterday, eastern parts of the country are being drenched with heavy rainfall. In fact, Gyeongsang-do provinces and surrounding regions will be hit the hardest by the rain, with more than 200 millimeters of downpours expected, along with strong winds. So heavy rain warning remains in place in Busan and parts of Gyeongsang-do provinces, and Jeju are under a heavy rain advisory. Now, the southern coast of Gyeongsang-namdo province could see 70 millimeters an hour of rain hammering down today. Afternoon highs in Seoul and most of western regions are a couple of degrees higher than Wednesday, Seoul topping out at 29 degrees Celsius, with on and off light showers expected in the west, while eastern regions have daytime highs that are 3 to 5 degrees lower along with rain. Daegu should notice a big drop from yesterday's 34 to 28 degrees Celsius this afternoon. We are getting so much rain this summer, and this band of rain lets up tomorrow morning. Then it will rain again early next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Thank you for joining Thursday's edition of the Daily Report. We have a panel discussion ready for you right after this, where we cover how more Korean curators are promoting K-culture and art around the world. Do join me again at this time tomorrow to get the latest afternoon news here in Korea.